Welcome to video lesson 8. Today we're going to be discussing ATP, the energy currency of the body. And by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to recognize the structure of ATP, explain its importance, describe whether energy is released or stored during ATP synthesis and degradation, and be able to describe the chemical process used to produce ATP. So let's begin with what is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And as the title suggests, ATP is the energy currency of the cell. You may ask me, well, what do you mean by the energy currency of the cell? Well, if we were to use an analogy, of monetary currency, we can look at something like bars of gold. They have really high value, but they tend to be kind of difficult to spend. So you can store lots of value of money, stack them up all nice and neat, not take up too much room in bars of gold, but try and spend that at a dollar store, see how far you get. That's kind of like fat in our body. Great for storing energy, not so easy for spending. Then we could look at a lovely $100 bill. This is a fairly high amount of value and easier to spend, but still a bit difficult. You imagine if you go into a dollar store, you give them a $100 bill for a dollar item, you might not be able to get change back. This is kind of like carbs. They're kind of easy for storing for some sort of medium-term storage, but if you just were directly to break down carbs and try and use the energy from it, you'd have a whole lot of excess energy sitting around for doing reactions. Then you have the toonie. Okay. This is less monetary value, but typically easier to spend. On cheaper things. This is like ATP in our body. Because most of the reactions that occur in our body don't require a ton of energy, they just require small amounts of energy. And ATP releases the perfect amount of energy for those reactions without wasting a whole bunch. Because when it comes to energy, your body doesn't give you change back. So what is the structure of ATP? How is it storing this energy? Okay. ATP, I said, was adenosine triphosphate. If we look here, we have what is the adenosine part. It's actually closely related to structure. You should know from Bio 11. You have the base, adenine, see the two rings of a purine, attached to a sugar, which you should be very familiar with, ribose. And when we attach the two together, we call it adenosine instead of adenine. And then, if we attach one phosphate group, it's called adenosine. The prefix for one, that's right, monophosphate, AMP. If we attach a second phosphate group, it becomes adenosine diphosphate, ADP. And finally, if we attach the third phosphate group, we get adenosine triphosphate. And the important part of this structure is each time we form a bond between the phosphate group, right here, that bond stores chemical energy. And it's just enough, usually, that when you release that chemical energy, it can drive reactions that our body needs to perform. And if it's not enough, well, then you just spend a few more ATPs to release a bit more energy. So how does the body use ATP to basically transfer energy from one place to another? Is to build and break down ATP. It uses ATP to transfer energy. So the first thing it does is it starts to store energy in ATP by bonding phosphates to it. And in that bond, I said there's energy stored. So to bond the phosphate group to it, it actually has to form over here the ATP. So this would be an example of ADP cycling to ATP. To bond it, it has to put in energy. Generally, this energy comes from breaking down glucose. As you break down glucose, it releases mass amounts of energy, and you can use it to produce several ATP molecules. When you put energy into something, that is called endergonic reaction. Ender referring to energy, referring to in, and gonic referring to energy. Once it does this, you now have a molecule that's storing energy. If you need a reaction to be powered by that energy, you must then release it by breaking that bond. Okay, and you break, so up here that would be a synthesis. In this reaction, this phosphate group would actually have an oxygen on it, as would this would have an OH group. So it's a dehydration synthesis. And if you want to break that bond and release the energy, you're going to have to add in water to break the bond by a hydrolysis. And when we do that, we separate that bond, and not only do we get ADP plus phosphate, we also get the energy released. So your body cycles back and forth. If it has a lot of glucose, it'll start producing ATP. And if it needs that ATP for something, the energy for something, it'll break it down. So that asks the question, how does the body actually go through that cycle and make ATP? The answer is really a series of complex reactions, which you will not need to learn until you go to university. In fact, those complex reactions are really simplified over here in this picture, where you'll notice there's a lot of words you probably don't know. There are some key things you can pick up. You probably should be able to start recognizing glucose there. You can see that oxygen is a reactant. It goes in, and water is produced. ADP is reactant, and ATP is produced. The key answer is the body actually performs this through a series of complex reactions in the mitochondria. And when we take all these complex reactions together, it equals the process of cellular respiration. Now, way back when, somewhere I think about grade 8 or grade 9, you were supposed to be taught about cellular respiration. And you should have been told something like glucose plus oxygen react to produce carbon dioxide plus water. See, the carbon dioxide's up here coming out as a product, plus energy. Now in grade 12, you're expected to be able to say, so this is your grade 8, you're supposed to be able to give the formula of glucose, C6H12O6 plus, I'm going to leave a space here, O2 goes to little space CO2 plus blank H2O, plus this time we know the energy is being stored in the form of ATP. Okay. And I left the blanks because for those who have chemistry, you know we should balance this equation, and the way to balance this equation is to throw in front of here let's take a quick look. We need a 6 CO2s plus 6 H2Os plus 6 O2s will balance the equation. Okay. So that's what you should know for grade 12. You should know that it occurs in the mitochondria, that it's called cellular respiration, and that it produces ATP. And you should know, if you go back, that the ATP is actually produced by using the energy from the glucose to bond a phosphate to the ADP. That then stores a small amount of energy which can be released as needed for chemical reactions in the cell. If you have any questions on that, you can come see me in class. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day. I'll see you in class.